Hey guys, this is Blue Forest. I hope you're doing well. So today I'm doing an update to the anti-tier list series, which if you didn't see it, was a series that I did over the last few months where I did some in-depth analysis on nearly every bot in the game. And so today I wanted to do a bit of a special edition where we go over the new bots. We're going to cover Dirge, Skywarp, and Ironhide. Obviously, I couldn't cover all of them when I made those videos, and so now that I've played with all of them, at least some, I wanted to include them in the latest edition of the anti-tier list series. And so we are going to go ahead and start with Dirge. So this guy is definitely very strong. I have played with him as a 5-star. I have also spoken to friends who have used him in difficult content, and he's definitely a contender. He's a very solid warrior for sure. So his Sig, Grim Mockery, allows Dirge to gain an attack buff when the opponent misses attacks while under the effects of fear, which we will certainly talk about. His Sig also reduces the chance that the opponent will remove fear, and the attack buff that you get with his Sig goes up with Sig level. So at Sig 1, he's getting an attack buff for 5 seconds. It goes up to 60%, I believe, at Sig 100. So if you were to invest in his Sig even a little bit, you could get that attack buff for 5 seconds. And remember, you could do it repeatedly because of the way that fear works. So it's definitely a pretty solid offensive Sig. So we should talk about fear. So when you start a fight using Dirge, the opponent always has fear, which is really interesting. If the opponent blocks, backdashes, or sidesteps 3 times without hitting Dirge, they will also get fear applied on them. So that means if you're a pretty good player, you don't get hit a lot, you're going to be able to apply fear quite a lot. And it also kind of acts as its own sort of anti-evasion. He doesn't have normal anti-evasion in the sense that he will prevent the opponent from evading. However, fear penalizes the opponent for dodging attacks, which is very interesting. On top of that, when the opponent has fear, Dirge will get up to a 40% crit chance on attacks based on rank, and he will deal a very strong bleed, which also goes up with rank. So at rank 6, Dirge will apply bleed for 165% attack over 2 seconds. So it's a brief bleed, but it's a very strong bleed. It's kind of similar to Bone Crusher's bleed with his special 1, which is also 2 seconds, but it's a much stronger bleed than Bone Crusher's. And so this is a really powerful bleed. You've probably seen it if you fought against Dirge, like in a time slide. If you take that bleed damage, it is a lot. And finally, with fear, when the opponent backdashes or sidesteps, they will get up to a 40% attack debuff as well, also based on rank. So there's a lot going on with fear. You have these buffs and debuffs as well as passive bleed damage. Fear is really great. It's a new ability. It's easy to apply, and even though it can be removed, if you're a good player, it will be difficult for the opponent to remove it. And so in terms of removing fear, the opponent can remove it with attacks. So light attacks have a 20% chance to nullify fear, mediums have a 40% chance. So as long as your dodging game is down, it's going to be very difficult for the AI to remove fear. His special attacks also have a relationship with fear. So his special 1, which is definitely a very solid special, will deal up to 35% additional damage when fear is active. His special 2 does up to 45% burn damage over 4 seconds, but if the opponent is under the effects of fear, this is doubled to 8 seconds. And then his special 3 is really strong because it applies a 30-second period of fear. That's very long. On top of that, after you use the special 3, that fear cannot be removed with attacks, and bleeds are doubled in strength. So that special 3 will be a great one to use in long fights. You get these very long periods of fear. The opponent will not be able to remove it, and they will take a ton of bleed damage. I also want to mention that if you use the Deep Wounds Mastery, so if you're using other bleed bots like Necro, RC, Cheetor, OGP, MV1, if you like to use bleed bots and you have Deep Wounds activated, Dirge will greatly benefit because it will make those bleeds a little bit longer. You won't have to use Deep Wounds, but if you are using Deep Wounds, Dirge will do very, very well with that mastery activated. I also want to mention one very important thing, which is that fear cannot be purified by bots like Grim and TC, which is pretty awesome. They could purify the bleeds for sure. With TC, for example, if he's able to purify in time, but you cannot remove fear with purification. You can only remove it with attacks, which is also very interesting. In terms of synergies, so all of these bots, Dirge, Skywarp, and Ironhide, do not have a lot of incoming synergies. I think Kabam needs to kind of flesh that out. So there isn't a whole lot going on, but Dirge being a Seeker, obviously he benefits from Starscream Seekers, the other Decepticon synergies like Hand of Chaos. He has a decent synergy with Ramjet. He helps Ramjet out, and also he has a chance to stun when the opponent backsteps or sidesteps. Unfortunately, it's only a half-second stun, which is just really silly because by the time you notice it, it's gone. So I wish that stun was longer. But even though his synergies, his sort of one-to-one synergies, the incoming synergies are not great, he will benefit from all of those Decepticon synergies, and he has a very strong kit. Lots of passive damage, bleeds, burns, lots of crits. And Fear is just a really fantastic and very interesting ability that Kabam created. So if you're looking for a new bot to rank up, certainly a new warrior to rank up, Dirge, I would say, is very worth taking a very good look at. So next up we have Skywarp. Okay, so Skywarp, the latest tech. His SIG is actually one of my least favorite SIGs in the game just because it isn't actually very useful. So Cut and Run allows him to evade the last hit of a special attack. That's it. This is problematic for several reasons. First of all, he can only evade the last hit of an attack. Almost all of the special attacks in the game are multiple hits, with the exception of MV1's and Ultra Magnus's Special 1. Most specials have many hits, and so, since he's only evading the last hit of it, if you end up eating the first hit or the first couple of hits, you're either going to take a lot of damage, or if it's a difficult fight, you're going to end up dead before he could evade the last hit anyway. So it could help you out a little bit if you stay alive, but it's just kind of silly and pointless that he only evades the last hit. On top of that, it doesn't really make sense because this is a game where dodging specials and attacks in general is incredibly important. We don't really need a SIG that's going to evade for you. And most importantly, it's very RNG based. So at SIG 5, he has a 23% chance to evade the last hit, but at SIG 100, it only goes up to a 75% chance. This means that if you were to invest a ton of resources into his SIG, you would still not have a guaranteed evasion on one hit of a special. So it's definitely not my favorite. I think they could have done a much better job with his SIG, but it is there. It could help you out a little bit, but it's certainly not one that I think most people are going to want to pour many resources into, especially compared to the SIGs of the other techs, which are generally much stronger. With that said, Skywarp is a very defensive bot with lots and lots of utility. He has very, very little offense. He is weak. He is not a hard hitter at all, but he does have a ton of utility. So if that's what you're looking for, he does have some interesting things going for him. So Skywarp is all about his teleport charges and, of course, his power control, which is actually quite good, right? So passively speaking, Skywarp gains a teleport charge every 12 seconds. He can also gain a teleport charge if he dodges a special attack. Teleport charges can be removed with crits. So if the opponent hits Skywarp, there's a 25% chance of removing a teleport charge with a crit, and scouts have a 50% chance to remove teleport charges with crits. Skywarp has a lot of utility with his range shots, both basic ranged and heavies. So basic range shots have a 20% chance to apply a 10% special attack down for 5 seconds, and heavies have a 50% chance to apply a special attack down for 9 seconds. So the heavies in particular, you're going to get that debuff pretty often. It lasts 9 seconds. Again, it's entirely defensive, but it is there and it's easy to apply. And so when he has teleport charges, this definitely changes his attacks. Obviously, his specials, his special 1 and 2 look different, but he also has some interesting abilities. So with teleport charges, he gets up to a 30% crit chance based on rank. So that does go up with rank. That is really good. Unfortunately, in my experience playing with him, he does not seem to crit that much, so maybe that could be buffed a little bit, but at least according to his kit, he does get an increased crit chance with his teleport charges, and his teleport attacks, so that special 1 and 2, are unblockable. This is one of the nice things about his kit. He does have those unblockable specials, so if you time those right, the opponent won't be able to block them. They will only be able to dodge them. On top of that, one of the best things about his kit is that with teleport charges, he has a 50% chance to power lock for 8 seconds. So you can land those power locks with his specials over and over again. They last long, and they do activate often. I've tested it. You can get a lot of power lock. This is where his power control really comes into play. And attacks done with teleport charges also purify burn. Now, I need to mention that at least for now, he isn't only purifying burn. He's purifying other debuffs as well. Many people have pointed this out, and I have had this happen myself multiple times. I have seen Skywarp purify bleed, purify shock, and it's not just a visual bug either. Like, you can see the damage stops. So for whatever reason, he is purifying everything, or at least a lot of debuffs. I don't know if they'll fix that. According to his kit, it's only burn, but he is purifying other things as well. With those teleport charges. So in terms of his specials, he's also getting a lot more defense, right? So with his special 1, he can drain up to 8% power based on rank for 9 seconds. So he gets this power burn, kind of like the power burn that Mirage gets with his ranged attacks. I have tested it. It does work well, so that's another form of power control. His special 2 gives him a shield. It's a crit damage resistance shield, which reduces crit damage by 70% until he next teleports. This is fine, but it's not that great of a shield because it's only reducing crit damage. So if you end up eating a big hit, you're still going to take some crit damage and some damage overall. So it could certainly be a better shield. However, it is there. And then his special 3 does also have some very nice power control in the sense that his special 3 will power steal up to 50% of the opponent's power, again based on rank. And if the opponent goes to 0 power as a result of the special 3, Skywarp gets a 15% power rate buff for the rest of the fight. So the special 3 could actually be useful in long fights. You use that early on. If you're able to drain all the opponent's power, then he will get that power rate buff, which is pretty nice. So he has a lot of power control in particular, lots of power locks, power burns, and so forth. But again, there are other power controllers that do a lot more damage, bots like Prowl, bots like Kickback. So certainly Skywarp is going to do well against bots like Tronus, against, power flow bots, things like that. He will do well. He will be able to control that aspect of the fight. Unfortunately, though, I think too much of his kit is based upon power control in particular. But in terms of synergies, again, not much going on. He is a Seeker, so he gets those Decepticon synergies. But he does have a nice synergy with Mirage where he gets 10% special damage. So again, hopefully Kabam will update those synergies. So as I said, extremely defensive. He's clearly designed that way. He could certainly use a good buff. He also, by the way, has 0 DOT, no shock, which is kind of surprising, no bleed, nothing else. So fights with him are going to be long, especially compared to most other techs. He's not going to be doing lots of damage, but if you're looking for utility, he might be worth a look for you. But I think most people, at least as he is, are going to find other techs to be more useful and more well-rounded. So finally, that brings us to Ironhide, our newest bot. So G1 Ironhide, I've played with him some now. I don't have him as a 5-star, but I do have him as a 3 and 4. And I'm very impressed with him. I think overall, anyway, he's very strong, he's very tanky, and he's capable of some pretty massive damage if you play him well. And he's also got a pretty smooth and nice play style. So his SIG, the Trithelium body, it's the melee reflect. So when he hits 75, 50, and 25%, he has a chance to reflect melee attacks, which will do 75% of his attack as damage. And so if you have a ranked up Ironhide, he could be doing a lot of damage, which you've probably seen, not even just in the last time slide. If you did the fortification arenas and fought against him in those G1 Ironhide arena teams, if you were hitting him at 75%, he was doing real damage. The thing about his SIG, though, is that it is also RNG based. So at Sig 5, he has a 23% chance to reflect melees. It goes up to 90% at Sig 100. So you definitely would want to invest in it if you wanted to be able to take advantage of it. But of course, it is primarily defensive. So it's not the greatest Sig, even though it will be able to do a lot of damage. However, you're going to have to rank it up. You certainly invest in it if you want to be able to reflect a lot. But the nice thing about it is that it does last 7.5 seconds each time, which is a lot. So, I mean, if an opponent were to theoretically get you down to 0, that's over 20 total seconds of melee reflection. So it does have some use for sure. I'm sure that some people will probably invest in it and get a lot of fun out of it. But because it is largely defensive and it's RNG based, it's probably not going to be the wisest Sig, I think, for a lot of people to pour a lot of resources into. With that said, most of the rest of his kit is excellent. So first of all, he starts out with a 15% critical resistance in his kit. So this is interesting because unlike a bot like Grinder, who has passive armor, Ironhide has passive critical resistance. This is great. It makes him immediately a bit tanky. And it's really interesting because this is paired, of course, with his armor buffs, which are very important. So at the start of the fight, Ironhide gains 5 armor buffs, which reduce damage by 4% each for 10 seconds. So it almost kind of acts like the Full Metal Mastery a little bit, in the sense that you're taking less damage for the first 10 seconds of the fight. On top of that, whenever he is attacked, he has a 30% chance to gain an armor buff, which reduces damage up to 12%, depending on rank, also for 10 seconds. So he can get a lot of armor buffs. I believe they stack up to 10. More importantly, however, when he gains an armor buff, he has a 50% chance to gain up to a 26% melee buff based on rank for 8 seconds. This is a lot. That's a big melee buff, and because you have a 50% chance to get it every time he gets an armor buff, you're going to be getting this pretty often, and again, it increases with rank. So a rank 5, rank 6 Ironhide is going to be getting a really nice melee buff over and over again, which is really, really cool. But perhaps the best part of all the way that his buffs work is the fact that you can refresh his buffs. So the last hit of a medium combo will refresh all of his armor buffs, and that means that you can just spam those medium combos, you can use them wisely, you're going to be able to keep those armor buffs going, and like I said, you can get a lot of them. That is really, really awesome. On top of that, I should mention that when he has less than 5 buffs, he gains an armor buff, which reduces damage by 2% for 10 seconds. And so we should get into how he loses his buffs, because he can lose them. It's totally fine because you can get them back, but you do need to be aware of it. So first of all, we need to talk about his purification, okay? So Ironhide can purify all debuffs, and I've heard from multiple players that he does seem to be able to purify everything. That is the good news. However, when he purifies, which he does by blocking, he does lose 1 armor buff. Now that's totally fine, but you do need to be mindful of that. More importantly, however, I would say the purification is probably the weakest point of his kit as of now, because you have to pause and block for a full 1.5 seconds in order to purify. This is problematic for several reasons. First of all, it's really going to be more like 2 seconds or more, because you have to think about reaction time. So if the opponent lands a bleed or a shock on you, okay, you realize it, then you have to hold block for a full 1.5 seconds before you purify, which means that you're going to take some bleed or shock damage or whatever it is before the purification happens. In really difficult fights where DOT does a lot of damage, this could be a real issue. But more importantly is that the opponent is often not going to want to just let you pause and block. This is kind of like the issue with Galvatron's charging of his dark energy charges. If the opponent lands a bleed on you, you're going to have to be able to just stop and block for almost 2 seconds before the purification is going to happen. And it does seem to be a bit buggy. I have heard reports from people where if the opponent does attack you when you're blocking, which they often probably will, it's sort of resetting the timer, and so it's making the purification take even longer to happen. So I wish that the purification happened a different way, or at least that it was shorter. But like I said, the good news is he does have it, and it does seem to purify all debuffs. But you will have to be mindful of that, especially for difficult fights. So When it comes to his specials, this is the primary way he is going to lose his armor buffs. So for each armor buff on Ironhide, he has a 10% chance to stun for 3 seconds. So you could theoretically have a 100% chance if you have 10 armor buffs. A 3-second stun is a very long stun, and more importantly, heavies will do 200% additional damage against stunned opponents. So if you land a special, right, you can get that 3-second stun, which is very long. You can land a medium combo and do a heavy. You're going to be able to do ridiculous damage. On top of that, when it comes to his specials, they're all very useful in their own way. His special 1 is probably going to be the most effective offensively because he gets up to a 35% melee buff based on rank for 10 seconds. 35%, which, by the way, could be combined with the other melee buff that he can get when he gains armor buffs, right? So you have the potential between the melee buff that he gets with his special, the other melee buffs, his heavies, to do ridiculous damage after using that special 1. It's a really, really smart and cool special to use. With his special 2, he does go unstoppable for 7 seconds. It's guaranteed. It's a long time. You could work with that. When it ends, when the unstoppable ends, he gains 4% armor buffs for 10 seconds. And the special 3 could be useful because it refreshes all of his armor buffs. But also, after you use the special 3, all debuffs that are applied by the opponent on Ironhide are permanently 10% weaker for the rest of the fight. So it could be useful to use a special 3 in a long fight early on. You refresh those buffs, but more importantly, any debuffs that are landed on Ironhide are going to be weaker for the rest of the fight. So all of his specials will have good use, but like I said, I think his special 1, in my testing with him, his special 1 is probably the most effective offensively. You get that melee buff, you can often get that stun, you land those medium combos, you refresh those armor buffs, you get that heavy in. We're talking major, major damage. I've seen him do really big damage even as a 4-star. So overall, Ironhide, he's got a ton going for him. Lots of armor and melee buffs. He's got stuns. He's able to refresh those buffs. He's got very useful specials. His purification, like I said, is a little bit problematic, but maybe they'll update it. Maybe they won't. And finally, in terms of synergies, again, not so great, but he has a couple interesting ones, particularly his synergy with Prowl, in which he gains 12% attack against Decepticons. And if you're using both Prowl and Ultra Magnus, he will gain both armor and attack with the Brothers in Arms synergy. So hopefully, like I said, with Dirge and Skywarp, they'll add a few more synergies to all of these bots. But even as a standalone bot, Ironhide is very strong, super tanky, lots of defense and lots of offense. I think over time, as more people get him, I think he will certainly be a contender and he will be more widely used. So that wraps up this edition of the anti-tier list. I hope this has been helpful. Once we do get Rodimus and Slipstream, I will certainly do another video later. For now, do take care of yourselves. Let me know if you have any questions, and we will speak again soon.